I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
The palace staff had been summoned without explanation, expecting another carefully managed announcement. Instead, Princess Anne entered the room, carrying a sealed letter that Queen Camilla never intended them to see. She did not shout. She did not accuse anyone. She simply unfolded the pages, looked directly toward Camilla, and began reading every brutal sentence aloud. Before Anne reached the final paragraph, the Queen's face had changed, and the entire royal household understood that something irreversible had begun. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. More than 60 members of the royal household stood inside the grand reception room shortly after 8 that morning. The royal household means the employees who support the sovereign and wider family in official duties. Senior secretaries stood beside footmen, drivers, housekeepers, security officers, and people who had served Elizabeth II through ceremony, grief, and national change. No agenda had been given. That silence mattered, because sudden palace gatherings rarely brought comfort. Anne began with the first recommendation. Camilla's private restructuring letter called for several long-serving employees to be dismissed or reassigned. A restructuring letter is a written plan for changing jobs, authority, and reporting lines inside an organization. Yet this document went further. It demanded that the Princess Royal be removed from key household decisions and described the old system as an outdated culture of inherited loyalty that should be replaced by a team answering directly to the Queen's office. Camilla did not move. She had expected a procedural objection, a closed discussion with Charles, not this. Anne's voice stayed level as she reached the names of people she had known for years. Her fingers tightened around the pages. To her, those names belonged to people who had stood through funerals, crises, and her mother's final days. To the Queen, their loyalty had become resistance. That difference cut deeper than any insult. Camilla tried to interrupt, but Anne raised one hand and continued. Then came the damaging paragraph. The letter claimed Anne's influence had become disproportionate and proposed limiting her access to Charles. A murmur moved through the room. This was no longer about staffing, it was about who controlled the king. Every face turned toward Charles. He removed his glasses, placed them beside him, and stared at the carpet. He offered no denial, defense, or explanation. Anne reached the page, stopped before the handwritten note beneath Camilla's signature, and folded the letter once. The public reading had exposed the plan, but the deeper wound lay in the people seated only feet apart, each carrying a different fear about what Camilla's letter could destroy. To the staff, the letter threatened careers and livelihoods. To Princess Anne, Queen Camilla, and King Charles, it threatened something far more personal. Anne saw an attack on the values her mother had protected. Camilla saw years of fragile acceptance collapsing in minutes. Charles saw the two strongest women in his life, forcing him toward a decision he had spent years avoiding. Behind the palace titles were 3 human beings, and none of them could leave that room unchanged. Anne had built her life around duty, without performance. She did not seek affection from the household, and she rarely asked for praise, but she remembered who remained steady when the family itself was breaking. Many of the employees named in Camilla's letter had served during national emergencies, royal funerals, and the final years of Elizabeth II. Institutional memory means the experience and knowledge carried by long-serving people who understand how an organization survives difficult moments. To the Princess Royal, dismissing them was not modernization. It was the deliberate removal of the people who still remembered what loyalty had once meant. Camilla carried a different wound. She believed the same courtiers had spent years accepting her title while quietly refusing her authority. Whenever a difficult question reached the household, senior staff still looked toward Anne. Whenever Charles became tired or overwhelmed, unresolved decisions seemed to find their way to his sister. The Queen saw herself surrounded by a shadow court, a private network of trusted figures whose influence operated without formal appointment. She had gained ceremony, status, and recognition, yet she feared that practical power remained elsewhere. Charles understood both women, and that knowledge trapped him. He watched Anne's expression harden each time another employee was named. He watched Camilla's confidence fade as her private fears were exposed before the room. The king knew that defending his sister would wound his wife, while protecting the queen would appear to betray the people who had served his mother. His silence was not emptiness, it was paralysis. Then Margaret Ellis heard her own position described as non-essential. The senior housekeeper had given 32 years to the household. She lowered her eyes, removed the small staff pin from her uniform, and closed it inside her palm. Anne saw the gesture. For one brief second, her voice faltered. That moment changed the reading. The letter was no longer about influence or titles. It was about a woman preparing to surrender the symbol of a lifetime's service because someone had reduced her loyalty to a line on a page. Anne finished the document, but she did not sit down. She told the staff that another communication existed, a recorded office copy sent several days earlier, listing people Camilla wanted excluded from future private briefings. Private briefings are closed meetings where senior royals receive sensitive advice before decisions are made. The Princess Royal refused to reveal every name. She disclosed only that one member of the royal family appeared beside the employees. William stiffened near the rear doorway. Camilla noticed. Charles finally looked up. To understand why Camilla had prepared such a sweeping plan, the palace had to return to the night when a quiet disagreement became an unforgivable act of defiance. The letter did not emerge from months of vague discomfort. It began with one specific confrontation at Windsor, a dinner intended to display royal unity that instead exposed a hidden struggle for control. There were no cameras inside the private room, and no reporters near the table. Yet by the time coffee was served, Camilla had been contradicted before senior courtiers, Anne had refused a direct request, and Charles had allowed the silence between them to become more powerful than any spoken command. Camilla had arrived at the Windsor household founders' dinner, determined to prove that her authority could shape more than ceremonies. The gathering brought senior household officials together to recognize long service and discuss future operations. A household official is a senior employee responsible for managing royal duties, staff, or private schedules. Before dessert had been cleared, the Queen announced that 15 experienced employees would be reassigned after the summer. She spoke as though the decision had already been approved. Anne immediately sensed what others were too cautious to say. Several department heads had not been consulted, and Charles had not signed the final authorization. Royal authorization means the monarch's formal approval, allowing a decision to take effect. The Princess Royal placed her spoon beside the untouched dessert and asked whether the employees already knew. When Camilla answered that notification would follow, Anne's expression hardened. People who gave decades of service should not discover their fate after a ceremonial dinner, she said. The words were calm, but their effect was brutal. Several courtiers lowered their eyes in agreement. One senior secretary quietly closed the folder containing Camilla's proposal, a simple action that told the Queen her plan no longer carried certainty. She felt exposed. Worse, she believed Anne had deliberately shown everyone that her instructions could be challenged without consequence. Camilla turned toward Charles and waited for him to defend her. The king hesitated. He suggested they discuss the matter privately the next morning, hoping delay would cool the anger. Instead, his answer wounded them both. Anne heard weakness where leadership was needed. Camilla heard abandonment at the exact moment she expected loyalty. The Queen's resentment did not fade when the dinner ended. At 12:40 that night, she dictated a new restructuring letter to her private secretary through a recorded office account. She widened the proposal beyond staffing and recommended that Anne be excluded from informal household meetings unless invited directly by the monarch or his wife. Then chance intervened. The secure printer produced an extra copy that remained beneath the output tray. The next morning, a junior administrative officer found it and mistakenly placed it inside the red box prepared for Anne's engagements. A red box is a locked case used to carry official royal papers. Anne read the letter twice. She circled the phrase, "inherited loyalty," flattened the page against her desk, and called William, not Charles. By the time Anne entered the grand reception room, she had already decided that private warnings were no longer enough, and Camilla was about to confront her without the protection of closed doors. Camilla finally rose from her chair before Anne could continue. The movement was sudden enough to scrape the chair legs across the polished floor. For the first time that morning, the Queen abandoned composure and demanded that the reading stop. Anne lowered the pages, but did not retreat. What followed was not a debate about protocol. It was a face-to-face confrontation between two women who believed the other had crossed an unforgivable boundary. Camilla called the letter a confidential working proposal and accused Anne of turning private correspondence into a weapon. A working proposal is an early plan meant for discussion before any final decision is approved. The Queen insisted that no dismissals had been confirmed and argued that every institution must eventually change, including a royal household still shaped by habits from another reign. Yet her defense sounded colder each time she spoke, because the people named in those pages were standing only yards away. Anne refused to let confidentiality become a shield. She told Camilla that privacy could protect sensitive discussion, but it could not excuse contempt for those whose livelihoods were being discussed. The Princess Royal turned the letter around and asked whether she recognized the employees listed beneath the recommendations. Several staff members lowered their eyes. Margaret Ellis kept her pin closed inside her palm. Then Anne stepped forward. She placed the pages on the table between them and spoke without raising her voice. "Look at them while I read it." Camilla glanced toward the staff, but only for a moment. She quickly turned back to Anne. That single refusal carried more force than any confession. It suggested that the Queen could defend the plan in theory, but could not face the people who would suffer beneath it. Charles stood abruptly and ordered both women to stop. The King's command briefly restored silence, but Anne asked the question that had haunted the room from the beginning. Had he seen the letter before that morning? Camilla looked toward her husband, and for the first time her anger gave way to fear. Charles answered carefully. He had authorized a review of household operations, but he had never approved the names, the language, or the proposed restrictions on his sister. Royal approval means the monarch's direct permission for an official decision to move forward. His distinction left Camilla exposed. The broader review had been legitimate, her methods had not. Camilla struck back. She revealed that Anne had privately instructed two department heads to ignore any restructuring order that lacked Charles's personal signature. She accused the Princess Royal of creating a parallel chain of command, a second line of authority operating beside the official one, and encouraging staff resistance. Anne opened her mouth to respond, but William stepped away from the doorway first. He confirmed that he had advised the employees to demand written authorization before obeying any order affecting their positions. The room changed again. The heir had chosen his ground. William's intervention transformed a bitter household dispute into a battle over royal authority, and the next decision belonged to the one man whose silence had allowed it to grow. The monarchy does not survive on emotion alone. It survives through signatures, access, precedence, and the quiet authority to decide whose instructions become action. After William spoke, every person in the room understood that the conflict had reached that dangerous level. Camilla possessed the title of queen, Anne possessed decades of trust, and William represented the institution's future. Yet only Charles could decide whose conduct had endangered the crown and whether love would outweigh responsibility. Charles held the final authority over household appointments, but the palace did not function through one voice alone. Camilla controlled her own office, Anne carried influence earned through decades of service, and William commanded growing loyalty as heir. Precedence means the formal order of status and authority within the royal system. That delicate structure survived only while personal trust kept those powers from colliding. Now trust had collapsed in front of everyone. The letter was dangerous because it tried to turn private access into permanent control. By restricting Anne's attendance at informal meetings and removing veteran employees, Camilla would silence the people most likely to question her decisions before they reached the king. William understood that immediately. So did Charles. The proposal was no longer simply about efficiency. It was an attempt to reshape who could reach the monarch and whose warnings he would hear. Charles asked Margaret Ellis to step forward. She approached with the staff pin still closed inside her hand, and admitted that she had been prepared to leave without protest. What she could not understand was why 32 years of loyalty had been described as resistance. Margaret's voice remained steady, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. The king struggled before assuring her that no dismissal would proceed that day. Camilla could endure the accusation no longer. She told Charles that she had spent years being measured against women who came before her, surrounded by courtiers waiting for her to fail. The Queen's voice broke as she said the household gave Anne instinctive loyalty while forcing her to ask for every fragment of respect. Her confession did not excuse the letter, but it exposed the fear beneath it. Anne then unfolded the final page and read the handwritten instruction beneath Camilla's signature. Proceed before the king is drawn into unnecessary detail. Silence followed. That sentence destroyed the defense that normal approval had been expected. It suggested the changes were meant to begin before Charles examined them closely. The monarch could no longer delay. He suspended the restructuring plan, removed it from Camilla's office, and placed it under temporary review by his private secretary and William. A private secretary is the senior advisor who manages royal duties, correspondence, and official decisions. Charles left Camilla's title and public role untouched, but he stripped the letter of all authority. Camilla removed her glasses, folded them into one hand, and walked toward the side door alone. Anne watched her leave, realizing that victory could wound as deeply as defeat. The letter had been stopped, but the damage could not be suspended with it. Within hours, empty offices, cancelled meetings, and frightened loyalties revealed the true cost of the confrontation. By noon, the palace no longer felt like one household. Camilla's aides closed their office doors. Anne's supporters spoke in whispers. Employees who had survived royal divorces, funerals, scandals, and changes of reign suddenly feared being labeled members of one faction or another. The public knew nothing, but inside the walls, every cancelled appointment carried meaning. The letter had been neutralized, yet the act of reading it aloud had forced everyone to choose where loyalty ended and obedience began. 3 meetings linked to Camilla's household were postponed before lunch. Department heads received written instructions that no staffing change could proceed without Charles's signature, while security restricted access to personnel files and gathered every copy of the letter for review. Personnel files are confidential records containing an employee's role, history, and official assessments. The order protected the staff, but it also confirmed that the palace no longer trusted its own internal process. Anne received quiet thanks from several employees as she returned to her office. Others avoided her. They were relieved their positions had been protected, yet disturbed that a private dispute had exploded before the entire household. The Princess Royal had defended them, but she had also shown how quickly confidential discussions could become weapons. Camilla sat alone in her private sitting room and removed the brooch she had worn that morning. She placed it on the table with more force than she intended. When an aide asked whether she wanted lunch, the Queen answered no. The untouched tray remained beside her as the corridor outside fell silent. For years, she had feared being tolerated rather than accepted. Now, even familiar footsteps seemed to stop before reaching her door. Anne found no triumph waiting in her own office. Margaret Ellis's staff pin lay where it had been accidentally left after the gathering. She picked it up and turned it slowly in her hand. The symbol reminded her why she had acted, but it also raised a harder question. Had protecting loyal employees truly required humiliating Camilla before them? Then another shock arrived. Camilla's private secretary submitted a written resignation, accepting responsibility for drafting and circulating the proposal. Charles refused to accept it immediately. The king suspected the offer might conceal who had shaped the harsher language after the Windsor dinner. A resignation could look like accountability while quietly ending the search for the full truth. William found the next fracture while examining the collected copies. The page numbers jumped from 4 to 6. Page 5 was missing. The prince believed it might contain the names of family members Camilla wanted excluded from informal briefings, turning suspicion into something far more dangerous. Near sunset, Charles sent Anne a handwritten message. No secretaries, no advisors, no staff. She read it twice. With the palace machinery temporarily frozen, brother and sister were finally left alone to confront the question everyone else avoided. Had Anne saved the household or crossed a line of her own? There were no uniforms in the room, no waiting courtiers, and no carefully prepared statements. Charles stood beside the window, while Anne remained near the closed door, each suddenly less like monarch and princess than a brother and sister carrying decades of shared memory. He did not ask whether the letter was offensive. He already knew it was. He asked why Anne had chosen public exposure and whether she understood what it had done to his marriage. Charles had removed his jacket, and Anne carried no papers. Without advisors nearby, neither could hide behind formal language or palace procedure. The small Windsor library held only the weight of what had happened that morning. He told his sister that Camilla had shut herself away and refused to attend the following day's engagement. A royal engagement is an official public duty carried out on behalf of the crown. The king accepted that the letter had been wrong, but he said reading it before the staff had turned correction into punishment. Anne did not defend herself immediately. She admitted that she wanted Camilla to feel the same helplessness forced upon the employees named in the proposal. The Princess Royal remembered their mother's belief that service should never be treated as disposable, and she had acted to protect that principle. Yet she also confessed something harder. Anger had shaped her decision. She had chosen an audience because she wanted the Queen to feel exposed. Charles lowered his voice. He admitted that his own delays had created the crisis. Each time tension grew between his wife and sister, he postponed the difficult conversation. By refusing to define Camilla's authority and Anne's advisory role, he had allowed insecurity to harden into rivalry. An advisory role means influence offered through guidance rather than direct command. His confession changed the argument. This was no longer a simple struggle between one woman who was wrong and another who was right. Then Charles produced the missing 5th page. The document recommended limiting William's informal access whenever the king appeared tired or unwell. Camilla had removed that page before sending the final version because, according to a recorded conversation with her private secretary, she realized the proposal had crossed a dangerous line. The revelation did not erase what remained in the letter, but it proved she had recognized the threat before Anne exposed it. Anne held the page, but refused to claim victory. She would not apologize for stopping the restructuring. She would apologize for forcing the staff to witness a family humiliation. Charles asked whether she would say that directly to Camilla, without him acting as a shield between them. Minutes later, Anne left the library and walked alone toward the Queen's apartments. The public confrontation had required courage, but the private apology demanded something harder. Anne and Camilla would have to surrender the certainty that only one of them had been wounded. By morning, the secret had escaped. The palace had not issued a statement, yet details of the reading reached every newsroom in Britain. Commentators argued over loyalty, authority, cruelty, and courage. Outside the gates, strangers arrived, carrying handwritten messages for staff members they had never met. But while the world turned the confrontation into a contest between two royal women, Anne and Camilla were finishing a private conversation that changed the meaning of the entire story. Broadcasters called it the most serious household confrontation of Charles's reign. Some praised Anne for defending employees who had given decades of service. Others condemned the public reading as calculated humiliation, arguing that the Princess Royal had weakened Camilla and embarrassed the king before his own staff. A royal household confrontation means an internal dispute involving the people, offices, and authority surrounding the monarch. This one had become dangerous because private pain was now shaping public judgment. The palace issued a short statement before midday. It confirmed that the staffing review had been suspended and that no employee named in the proposal would lose a position during an independent assessment. An independent assessment is a review conducted by people outside the immediate dispute. The statement also stressed that private correspondence should be handled with discretion. Its meaning was unmistakable. Camilla's plan had been rejected, but Anne's method had not been fully defended. Then one image captured the national mood. The fictional London Chronicle placed Anne holding the folded letter beneath the headline, "She read every word." Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered near the gates. A former palace employee left a bouquet carrying a handwritten note, "Service is not disposable." The message spread faster than any official explanation. Camilla saw the newspaper beside her breakfast. She studied Anne's photograph for several seconds, then turned the front page face down. An aide waited for anger. Instead, the Queen asked whether Margaret Ellis had received written confirmation that her position was secure. That question became the first sign that the private meeting had reached her conscience. Anne later told William what had happened behind the closed door. Camilla had accepted responsibility for allowing resentment to shape the letter's language. The Princess Royal, in return, had apologized for reading it before the full staff. Neither woman offered easy forgiveness, but both accepted that their authority needed limits. Together, they withdrew the restructuring plan permanently and proposed a new council of veteran employees, younger administrators, and representatives from both royal offices. Charles then summoned the same staff back to the grand reception room. Camilla would address them directly. Anne would stand beside her. The first gathering had exposed contempt and division. The second would determine whether the monarchy could transform humiliation into accountability without pretending the wound had never existed. The staff returned to the same room, but everything felt different. No one whispered. No one searched Anne's hands for another hidden page. Camilla stood before the employees without a prepared speech, while Charles and William remained several steps behind. Then Anne entered and took her place beside the Queen, not as an ally pretending nothing had happened, and not as an opponent seeking victory. She stood there as proof that accountability sometimes begins when two powerful people admit they both went too far. Camilla spoke first. She stated clearly that the letter had been written under her authority, and that its language had failed to respect the people whose service sustained the household. The Queen withdrew every proposed dismissal and promised that future reforms would require consultation, written justification, and direct discussion with anyone affected. Consultation means giving people a genuine chance to understand and respond before a decision is made. Her words could not erase the damage, but they ended the attempt to hide from it. Anne followed without seeking praise. She told the staff that stopping the plan had been necessary, but exposing private words before the entire household had caused pain beyond correction. The Princess Royal refused to apologize for defending loyal employees. She did apologize for forcing them to witness a family confrontation they should never have been made to carry. Her victory had protected their jobs, yet her anger had placed an emotional burden upon the same people she claimed to defend. Margaret Ellis stepped forward after both women had finished. Camilla personally returned the staff pin that Anne had discovered in her office. The senior housekeeper fastened it to her uniform with trembling fingers and told them that loyalty survives only when it is respected rather than demanded. Margaret's words carried no royal authority, but they delivered the clearest judgment of the day. Charles finally accepted the responsibility he had delayed. The king announced that Camilla would oversee her own household and charitable program, while Anne would retain advisory access without directing staff operations. An advisory role allows someone to offer guidance without holding final command. Major changes would now require transparent authorization, meaning clear written approval that could be examined and challenged. William heard his father define the boundaries that silence had once blurred. The letter had exposed more than a battle over jobs. Camilla feared permanent rejection. Anne feared that her mother's standards were being erased. Charles feared choosing between love and duty. Secrecy had turned every fear into a weapon. No easy friendship followed. The Queen's authority survived, but accountability narrowed it. The Princess Royal remained respected, but her methods were no longer beyond criticism. Their relationship became honest, limited, and more stable than the rivalry that came before. The letter that was meant to reorganize the palace, instead, reorganized the balance of power within it. Anne proved that duty must defend people, Camilla learned that authority without trust becomes isolation, and Charles finally understood that silence is also a decision. The room emptied without applause, but with something more valuable: the certainty that loyalty had been tested, pride had been confronted, and the crown had chosen accountability over concealment. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.